Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you for being here today. I wanted to ask you right off the bat, on September 29th, the U.S. Consulate General in Hong Kong issued a statement. Here's what it said in part. "We do not take sides in the discussions of Hong Kong's political development, nor do we support any particular individuals or groups involved in it," end quote. Does that reflect the official position of this administration, that we don't take sides?
Well, thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, Senator Rubio. I didn't get a chance to express my appreciation for your work, your leadership, and your support on this subcommittee. The statement issued by the consulate in September, which is one of a long series of public statements by U.S. officials, aimed at eradicating a story that was topping the news in Hong Kong, suggesting that the United States was the hidden hand behind a particular group or a particular individual involved in the demonstrations. The fact of the matter is, Senator, we do take sides. We take the side of justice. We take the side of freedom. We take the side of dialogue. We take the side of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. We take the side of peaceful protest. We don't take sides with an individual or a particular group. But if you look at our statements, the statements of the U.S. government, the President, the Secretary of State, and the consulate, you'll see a consistent and clear message of support for the principle of universal suffrage in line with the Basic Law, support for the aspirations, the democratic aspirations of the people of Hong Kong, and importantly, support for one country, two systems. We believe that the United States has a stake in preserving the unique character and system of Hong Kong. That is a system that has, as I mentioned before you came in, won the #1 spot in the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom. That counts for a lot. Similarly, we strongly support the process to apply universal suffrage to the selection of the chief executive in 2017. And by universal suffrage, we don't mean a very narrowly constructed arrangement. We mean giving voice to the citizens of Hong Kong, giving them a say in the selection of their leader.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that explanation. That clarifies most of that. But I did want to ask you this then. On the 31st of August, China's National People's Conference, and I'm going to read from it just to make sure that I don't get it right. It placed strict conditions, as has been talked about here. And here's one of the things that they said about what the Deputy Secretary General said: the candidates would need to, quote, love the country, I imagine meaning China, and also love Hong Kong, end quote. So I wonder if that, by that term of loving the country, is basically code for having loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. And so my question is it the position of this administration that the August decision with regards to the nature of this election is in keeping with the aims and the requirements of Article 45 of the Basic Law? Are the Chinese compliant with that in their position that they've taken?
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Senator. We were disappointed by the August 31st decision. We think that that formula excessively circumscribes the selection process that will be an essential element of the application of universal suffrage. Our analysis suggests that while that decision of the National People's Congress may not literally contravene the letter of the basic agreement, it falls very far short of the aspirations of the people of Hong Kong, and it falls short of what we would hope for in terms of a nomination process that would result in a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. The key point, Senator, is we believe that for the purposes of Hong Kong's long-term stability and prosperity, the legitimacy of the chief executive will be greatly enhanced by a credible application of universal suffrage that allows a free expression of choice by the voters to select from among competing points of view, not simply a choice between three identical hand-picked candidates. And this is what is under discussion now among the stakeholders in Hong Kong. I visited Hong Kong in May and found a very vibrant debate between non-governmental groups, between political parties, between the Hong Kong authorities, and obviously representatives of Beijing. That debate has intensified. It's spilled out onto the streets. It's taken the form of major referenda and questionnaires. And later this month, we expect and hope that it will again take the form of a second round of public consultations. So we consider this still a work in progress, and it is our determination as an administration to speak out and have America's voice
But to
heard
summarize your statement, and I appreciate your answer, but to summarize it is that perhaps they have found a technical way to, at a minimum, be semi-compliant with the letter of the law, but certainly fall well short of the spirit of the law.
That is
with regards to how it's been written. Well, in that sense, then, isn't there a couple lessons to be taken from this? The first is that the Chinese government has proven to be an untrustworthy ally or an untrustworthy partner in any sort of future or international agreements. I mean, they basically signed this agreement and now have found interesting ways to circumvent it, certainly in its application or how it's working, as you said, in the spirit of it. What does that say about their future reliability in any other agreement they enter into with us, with the international community, with anyone?
Senator,
at a minimum, it calls into question their reliability.
Senator, there's no question but that the United States, the region, and the world is watching how China deals with Hong Kong and how it implements its commitments under the Basic Law and other agreements. That's why we have been urging and counseling the Chinese, both privately and publicly, to exercise restraint, to be flexible, and to allow the voices of the people of Hong Kong to be heard. The neighbors are drawing conclusions also about China and about the reliability of China's pledges and commitments. I don't think that there is a case that can fairly be made to describe this August 31st decision by the NPC as in direct contravention of the Basic Law. But I equally believe there is not a credible case that would allow us to argue that the August 31st decision furthered the cause of universal suffrage.
Senator Rubio has one additional question, but I just really want to underscore one point of urgency here. You point out that the region is watching, the world is watching, and you're absolutely correct. Hong Kong is very important economically, not just to the United States bilaterally, but it's a part of the economic fiber of global commerce. So there's a great deal of interest in what's happening. But when you see what happened in the Taiwan elections, you know that it has political consequences. At least the analysis is that it had an impact on the results in Taiwan's elections. When you look at British parliamentarians being denied visas to look at the country to see how they're in compliance with agreements, that raises questions as to whether China's taken this to a different level. So I would just underscore the urgency of a strategy that includes more than just words as it relates to the autonomy and our relationship with Hong Kong. And Senator Rubio has one additional question.
I just would make the comment, I think you can make the argument that how you apply a law directly contradicts its meaning. Even if maybe what they're saying and what they're doing here are two separate things. They clearly want to influence the outcome of this election towards, they clearly want to set up a process that would elect someone that will do their bidding and will be compliant to the wishes of the central government in China. And that is in direct contradiction to an agreement that was based upon true autonomy. And so I do believe it's in direct contravention of the agreement. I furthermore would say that, there have been statements, there's been evidence that these groups of armed thugs who miraculously showed up out of nowhere to beat up these protesters, I think the evidence is pretty clear that they were sent there by the central government, at least in my opinion. And I would love to see someone disprove that. So I think that you have to look at that as well as a factor in all of this. But here's my final point. I think that the lesson to be learned by all of this is that all this talk out there, that the hopes that these economic interchanges and dialogue with China was going to change the nature of the central government, is a fairy tale. It's wishful thinking. This government, as it's currently structured in China, this is their nature, is to control, to be authoritarian. And every instance in which they have been challenged in that, or been challenged towards more of a democratic or societal opening, they have pushed back against. And Hong Kong is the latest example of it. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there, that if we are hanging our hopes on the fact that more economic interchange with them is going to somehow transform them into a more open, more liberalized, and more inclusive government, doesn't seem that way at this point, certainly from their reaction with what's happened in Hong Kong. And I think that that's a factor that we need to accept today as a reality, and base our policy based on that reality. Because this does not leave me hopeful that this is a government that at any point in the near future is going to be more open and more accommodating. In fact, it is the tactics of a government that's becoming increasingly more centralized, more authoritarian, and more willing to take strong actions against those who challenge the authority of the Communist Party and the central government. And I think that bodes ill for the future of the region and, quite frankly, of the world, as China takes on a greater economic and military importance. I have two questions. I want one for you, Dr. Richardson. I look at the U.S. response to this, and it seems like the majority of our statements are designed to prove that we have nothing to do with what's going on, as opposed to standing on behalf of the people that are fighting. In fact, you saw that in the testimony today, that the rationale behind the statement was we wanted to make clear that we weren't behind any one group versus another. And that should be 10% of what we talk about. 90% of it should be about democracy. Can you contrast what the U.S. reaction has been to what's happening in Hong Kong to the position the U.S. has taken in other parts of the world where there's been democracy movements, whether it's Burma or Ukraine or other parts of the world? How would you compare the U.S. reaction to this versus the U.S. reaction to other democracy movements around the world?
Well, I think you can look at it in a couple of different ways. I find myself thinking about, for example, Assistant Secretary Nuland walking out into Maidan Square and handing bread to people. This is a very evocative response, gesture of support. Obviously, there are different circumstances, but clearly the U.S. is capable of very demonstrably showing its support in certain circumstances. Look at what the president said when he was in Beijing. Again, factually accurate in making the right points, but I think in a way that was maximally designed not to irk his hosts. I don't mean to belittle the blowback that Assistant Secretary Russell will have received for that, but you can see that it's so calibrated as to become convoluted. Fast forward 36 hours when the president is in Burma, where he's speaking very clearly, very evocatively, and in great detail about the importance of democracy, elections, the particulars of the electoral arrangements. I think that really sends a message to pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong and in the mainland that they shouldn't have necessarily terribly high hopes for the kind of support that they're going to get from the U.S. in these circumstances.
I think the bottom line is that it is clear that our response to the democratic aspirations of people on the mainland or anywhere else when it comes to China are muted by realpolitik considerations with regarding to China's influence and size. In essence, if you want democracy, if you're going to fight for democracy and democratic openings in a place where China doesn't want it, you are not going to get the same response from the U.S. that you would in other parts of the world, because we don't want to ruin our relationship with the Chinese. That's the message that people are taking, and I think it's a counterproductive one. And then my question for you, Dr. Bush, is if you put yourself in the position now of people in Taiwan, or for that matter, any other nation in East Asia, as they look at Hong Kong as indicative of the nature of the Chinese government, what are they taking away from what they're seeing right now?
If you were a citizen of a country of Asia, and if you had watched what has happened in Hong Kong over the last 20-plus years, you would understand pretty clearly that the Chinese government rigged this political system to keep its friends in power. And that system is illegitimate. The people who are produced by it don't have the support of the people. And Hong Kong is now unstable because of that. So if you want stability in Hong Kong, which China says it does, if you want stability anywhere, it needs to be based on an open, competitive, democratic system. That's the way to get legitimate government.
But that's not what they offer.
No, it's not. I mean, there are ways, I think, of working even within the narrow confines. I'm not terribly optimistic that it's going to work out that way. But if they go in the direction that you fear and that I fear, they will continue to face problems in Hong Kong.
So my understanding is that the Chinese proposal for what it wants to see Taiwan become is very similar to the Hong Kong model.
The slogan is at least is the same, and it's been rejected by Taiwan people.
They know better.
They know much better. For all its problems, they like the democracy that they have, and they don't want to go back, which is where they see Hong Kong is in relation to them.
Is it fair to say, and this is my last question, that looking at what's happening in Hong Kong now is a true indication of the nature of the central government, and that moving forward, all of us who care about future China's rise in the world, but also its relationship with the United States and with its neighbors, needs to realize that what they say, you know, they go into these international forums, they smile, and they say one thing, and what they're going to do are two very different things. And when they talk about autonomy, when they talk about democratic opening, what it means to them is very different from what we think it means. And so that's where you wind up in a situation like what we have today, where we have someone testifying on behalf of the State Department and the administration that the agreement doesn't violate the letter of the agreement, but it violates the spirit of it. In essence, they may use the same terms that we use, but in practice, they are not the same terms. And the lesson to be learned is that is the true nature of this government for anyone who's looking to do a future arrangement or agreement with them.
Anybody who's studied China professionally knows that their definition of terms is not our definition of terms. And we have to adjust our diplomacy and to take account of that. I think Hong Kong people understand that China's use of terms is not their use of terms either.